Cool, guys. Just as a heads up, we are recording tonight. We've got an awesome lineup of American whiskies for you. I believe this is probably actually the first dedicated American whiskey tasting. Is that correct, Oliver, that we've done virtual through TWL?
We've done the very first virtual show we did was American. So, but yeah, we haven't done many since, and definitely not of this caliber in a long time.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Actually, these are some really killer whiskies. The lineup is there in the chat. If any of the people who just recently joined haven't seen that yet, feel free to get started on pouring those. Of course, a lot of the stuff that we're drinking is high proof tonight, so please make sure that you're not consuming alcohol and then getting behind the wheel. That's the last thing that we want. Make sure you're enjoying a little bit of water as well, or a lot of water. That's up to you. And pretty much we'll get kicking. I'd like to also introduce. We have most people here are aware of Ollie, part of the whiskey list. My name's Scott. I'm the American dude on the team. I defer to the rest of the team when it comes to Scotch whiskey, and I'm staking my claim here, I reckon. And then also I'd love to welcome Videl, who's kind of like co-hosting / featuring, like a rap music video, featuring Videl.
Hey guys. Look, I run the Brass page, so I don't know if any of you guys are on Facebook. So it is a Bourbon and Rye Australian Sipping Society. So we talk So on that Facebook page, we talk everything about American whiskey. So usually when I find out about new American whiskey bars, shows, even bottles that I find here in Australia, overseas, I usually post them and, point you in the right direction on where to actually get them or actually drink them. I just came back recently from London and I was paying £10 for George T. Staggs over there for a 50ml shot. So yeah, so if you want to find about all that information, go ahead over to Brass.
Yeah, and there's a few like pretty high caliber American whiskey writers in there as well. Like is it Michael Veitch? He shares some of his stuff. There's some really cool sources of knowledge in that group. So yeah, definitely recommend if any of you guys are American whiskey fans, jump on in there. Yeah, what's up, Paul?
Are you on any of the other social media for that?
Instagram,
Okay.
those kind of things.
Instagram? Okay, I'll check it out there. I'm not on Facebook at all.
Sorry, I'm not sure. Videl?
Okay, so for Instagram, are you following Whiskey Hunt Australia? If any of you guys are following Whiskey Hunt Australia at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah, so we go down to Kentucky and we do barrel picks. They also sell what do you say? What's their current release now? Is it Penelope at the moment? I can't remember now. I think it's either Wild Turkey, but if you follow their socials, they usually post out events. We just had one two weeks ago, which was the Bourbon Bus. So they'll take you to different venues, and then you get to try some really good American whiskey, and then there are surprises there where some highly sought after, highly allocated bottles come out. You get to be the first one to taste them in Australia. So, but yeah, so follow Brass, Whiskey Hunt Australia. You'll be sorted over there.
Yeah, Facebook's still the best place for those kind of like little group communities. So that's primarily the spot for the actual Brass group. But yeah, we're all active in different kinds of the community. So guys, before we get too bogged down, let's jump straight into whiskey number one. We don't like to make you wait with these tastings. This is Sagamore. If anybody has seen Sagamore before, this is what the bottle looks like. And this is a relative newcomer to the American whiskey scene. I suppose there's a lot of newcomers to the American whiskey scene, so maybe even it's not that relatively new anymore. But Sagamore is a rye whiskey based in Maryland, which is kind of in the northern east part of the States, kind of near New York State. And Maryland is basically an area of America that was really well known for making rye, but not in the past 100 years. And you kind of have to start going about 200 years ago before rye really became a massive thing in this part of the country, and it basically dominated American whiskey for a really long time. So let's get our noses into this. So this is a 4-year-old rye, which was then finished in Pedro Jimenez barrels. I believe the barrels are actually 500 liters. They're large PX sherry barrels, which they finished the whiskey in for an additional 14 months or something like that. So this says 6 years on the label, but it's that we sent out to you, but it's about 5.5, very close to 6. And Sagamore, what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of essentially bring back a Maryland style of rye. Rye in Maryland, there were a couple of different variations on whiskey that was made, this kind of era 200 years ago, pre-prohibition. And pretty much this whole area was a really incredible place for growing rye. It was used for lots of different reasons in agricultural kind of parts of America. And then obviously wherever you have excess grain and people who know how to distill, they're going to make it into whiskey. So the way that these guys are bringing back that style of Maryland whiskey, which apparently had a reasonable amount of corn in the mash bill, it was still a rye whiskey, but it wasn't primarily a 100% rye whiskey. It kind of potentially had a mixture of other grains in there as well. So to do that, what they did was they went, okay, well, let's use a recipe that has both high rye, so we get the flavor of rye whiskey, which people are still familiar with today, and then we're going to mix that with a recipe of low rye, which has corn in the mash bill. If anyone doesn't know what a mash bill is, essentially it's a recipe of grains that when kind of cooked and blended together and then fermented together and distilled together, it's like almost like a recipe, a specific recipe for a particular kind of flavor profile. You don't really start dealing with mash bills until you start dealing with American whiskies. Scotch whiskies, most single malts, we're talking 100% of malted barley, and then when we go into Scotch whiskey blends, we're talking about malted barley, which is then mixed with grain whiskey. So yeah, if we're talking about creating a blend of grains from the very start, kind of American whiskey is more the kind of the place we start looking to see that.
So the mash bill is 95 rye, 95.5, just like most MGPs.
So yeah, the high rye blend is 95% rye, 5% barley. And then the low rye percentage is 51% rye. They call that like a barely legal rye because it only just meets the definition of what a rye whiskey can be. And then 45% corn and 4% of the barley. So they're still using barley in that one there. They're just adding corn into the mix. And apparently Sagamore uses a 2-to-1 ratio. So you can imagine 2 barrels of the 95.5 recipe to every 1 barrel of the low rye recipe. So it almost turns out to be like something like an 80% rye mash bill.
What do people at home think about this one? Thumbs up, yeah. Tell us about the sherry, because this is a finish, yeah?
Yeah, this is a finish. Pedro Jimenez finish. So a sweet sherry. And there's been a lot of finishing. These guys are doing a really good job with finishing their spirits. They're doing their rye into wine barrels, into sherry barrels. I believe I've seen cognac barrels as well from these guys. Yeah, I mean it's similar to how lots of Scotch whiskey guys started the trend of well, not trend, let's say the practice of finishing, and there's a lot of American whiskey brands which are then taking on that. I think it actually naturally works really well with Maryland rye, because Maryland rye, there was a whole period where we believe actually a lot of ryes produced in Maryland and this kind of area actually were blended with fresh juices like cherry juice and peach and lots of kind of flavors to basically make the whiskey a little bit more accessible and easy to drink. So it's almost like this is harking back to the style of old Maryland whiskey, which has kind of then added a little bit of extra kind of juicy flavor to it.
It's a really good introduction for Scotch drinkers who badmouth bourbon and ryes. So you give them Sagamore, and it just really shows, what rye whiskey can really be. So, when we had that argument with Scotch drinkers, I'll just go here, try some Sagamore rye. There you go. In sherry finish, always sherry finish.
Yeah, generally like a lighter flavor profile than a lot of rye whiskies. So if people say, "Oh, I've tried rye whiskey, it's too spicy," then Sagamore is actually a really good one to try there as well. What's that Wild Manhattan finish you're talking about there, Allan?
So they finished the rye in vermouth casks, bitters casks, and then cherry brandy casks, and then vatted them together like a Manhattan cocktail, but a rye. And there's Calvados finishes, tequila finishes, barley wine finishes. I don't know. The guy that owns it's a billionaire, right? It's the guy who started Under
whatever he
Armour.
wants.
So he's obviously just like, blank check, guys, go for it. Buy whatever casks you want. It's really, who decides to put those three casks together? It's awesome.
So they're massive cocktail drinkers, and they love an old fashioned. And yeah, for them, they started doing some RTDs last year for the American market as well. But yeah, to push the boundaries.
Wait till we see him here. We're the biggest RTD consumers in the world. So, who does it? Wild Turkey, Jim Mills buys that stuff. Just get RTDs, guys. That's it. That's all.
Yeah, I don't mind an RTD. They do kind of cool cocktail ones, but I don't know if we're going to see that in Australia anytime soon. What they do oh yeah, there we go, turkey and red.
I'm in a hotel room. Come on.
Should have got the Wild Turkey Heritage. Was it 9%?
So yeah, they also have been making their own whiskey, which is something that some of the stuff that we're going to be tasting tonight. Actually, these guys are doing that. A lot of brands and a lot of bottlings never actually take that next step and decide we actually are going to try and start making our own whiskey. And Sagamore is they've invested a lot into a pretty huge operation, full column still, lots of proper warehouses, and yeah, basically they're going to be trying to replicate almost exactly the flavor profile that we have in our glass today. They are doing the same thing where they were purchasing those two recipes. They are now making those two recipes for themselves, and they've even started to release their own whiskey now. So at the distillery, you're able to pick up only at the distillery their bottle in bond, which is a very kind of specific set of regulations to create American whiskey around. The one they first released was a 4-year-old, and I believe now they have 5-year-old bottled in bond available at the distillery. And from all reports, it is very similar in flavor profile to what they've been putting out. Potentially like a little bit more funkiness from some yeast, but they are sourcing the same yeast, same mash bill. But yeah, they're kind of putting their own little spin on it.
So one of my friends lives over in Maryland, and they have these wild launch parties for their limited releases, where the bottles are $1, it's the closest because you can't legally give alcohol away in the state.
Mhm.
So the price per bottle is $1, but they come out and they give everyone cocktails in the line, and it's almost like a launch party. That's kind of a celebration of the brand rather than that thing where, like you see at Buffalo Trace, where everyone lines up for miles to buy a bottle to then sell it on. Sagamore's like, let's all have a party. We've got a cool new finish coming out.
How does everyone feel about the sweetness on this? Because for me, it's pretty balanced. I think the ABV really helps cut some of the sweetness, but because it is a PX barrel that's been finished in, there's going to be a lot of residual sugars, lots of kind of winey kind of sweetness that's going to come through. Andrew reckons pretty balanced. Do we get the PX influence on kind of all the elements, the nose, palate? Yeah, I agree, Matt. Pretty easy drinking. Good way to start the night. Well, feel free to leave a little bit left in the glass if you have enough glasses. Back to kind of flavor profile comparison later. Alrighty, so the next one is the Pinhook Vertical, and I'll show you the bottle for that one now.
I want
So that's-
Videl to tell us about this bottle.
Go on.
No, I'm not going to say no. I didn't write any notes for these ones yet.
So Pinhook is one of those brands that I was telling you about that they don't really have any intention, or they haven't shared any intention so far to start their own distillery. They're quite happy being a company that sources their whiskey and blends their whiskey and releases the whiskey in the way that they like. So this one here is a 6-year-old rye, and this is actually sourced from the same place as the last whiskey, sourced from MGP is what we all refer to it. Technically, that's not the
Is that from the back? Because some of these Pinhooks are sourced from Cask and Key.
I do believe
It should say if it's where it should say it's where it's made from.
bottled by Castle and Key, but
There you
distilled in
go.
Lawrenceburg, Indiana.
Oh well, the MJP then.
So there was a bit of an uproar, maybe about 2019, I think, in American whiskey, when people started to realize that the stuff that they were drinking wasn't actually being made or distilled by the people who had it in the bottle, by the brand that was on the bottle. There was a particular company, Templeton, that really got in trouble for this because they made it very unclear as to, they basically claimed that they did everything. You know, they distilled it, they bottled it, they did all the aging, whereas not necessarily the truth. There was a big class action lawsuit, and it forced the regulation to change, or at least update in such a way that every single distillery, every single bottle must have the state in which it was distilled listed on the label. And that told us a lot, because we learned that, well, if we didn't already know in some scenarios, it told us that a lot of our rye whiskey was coming from Indiana. And Indiana has a massive distillery in it called MGP, Midwest Grain Products. And there's a reason that they produce a huge portion of the rye whiskey which is consumed in America, is because they're really good at it. And almost everybody else can't stomach the idea of touching the stuff. It's almost like distilling porridge, you know, cooking porridge, and it like heats on the side of the still, sticks, creates gummy residue. Distillers absolutely hate working with rye whiskey. This famously, the guys at Wild Turkey, when Eddie Russell said to Jimmy Russell, I want to do rye whiskey, like almost got kind of like disowned from the family, you know, like it's like, why would we do rye whiskey? It's such a pain to work with. And so a lot of people ended up outsourcing to the best in America to do it. And MGP is widely accepted now as being, you know, probably one of the most consistent and probably potentially one of the best rye whiskey producers in America, they do happen to make a hell of a lot of rye whiskey. But that just means that there's more good quality rye whiskey on the market for people like Pinhook to purchase. So yeah, what do you guys think of this one? For me, this is like a lot more of a classic MGP flavor profile. You'll hear lots of talk about dill pickles, mint, grassy notes. That's a lot of the stuff that people usually get from MGP distillate. And that's probably just their yeast giving a lot of kind of awesome flavors on top of it. For me, this one's kind of like that, almost like the light grassiness. And then the palate is like classic MGP in my opinion. Videl, would you agree?
Look, this is classic young MGP rye. It's very green.
Owen says baking spice. That makes a lot of sense on the palate. Bit of brown sugar.
It's just spicy. It's like rye bread. It's just
one of my favorite things to do with rye is to just get a little bit of a dab on the back of the hand and dry it out. Then you can smell all those like fresh grain notes. I love that. So Pinhook's thing, because obviously if everybody is buying from the same source, not everybody is, but a lot of rye whiskey and even bourbon whiskey producers are purchasing from the same source, then each one of them needs their own little thing to distinguish themselves from the other. And Pinhook's kind of shtick, the thing that they do that distinguishes themselves from everyone else, is that they purchase lots. They purchase a lot of whiskey, not a lot of whiskey. They purchase a selection of barrels, which they obviously is a lot, and then they keep that as its own kind of separate piece collection of whiskies, which they then draw regular releases from over the course of a couple of years. So whenever you see a Pinhook bottle, whichever horse it is that they have on the front, that represents the lot that they have, and each one is named after a actual horse that's in the Kentucky Derby, which is almost like the Americans' version of the Melbourne Cup. And this horse is actually called Tis Rye Time. So this is also in a vertical series, so they're doing this series as well. Like 2 years ago, they were releasing a 4-year-old whiskey. Last year, they released a 5-year. This year, 6, and they're going to keep doing that for 9 years, I believe. So I think we'll have some whiskey from this exact same lot. We'll get to taste it in if we kind of can get access to those bottles, we can taste it in lots of different ages, see how it progresses.
It's just it's a good timeline of different ages of whiskey. It's like from 2 to I reckon they'll go up to 10 or 12, but it just shows you how rye whiskey changes up. It just takes a year for it to change dramatically. I was hoping.
Scott, do you know how they're doing that? Are they taking a little bit out of each barrel, or like if they're taking full barrels at a time, then they're not really going to get that vertical nature to it?
Yeah, I believe this lot has 50 barrels of rye. So they have a thing on the label that says a true single barrel. So I believe what they are doing is they are dumping a full barrel for one release. This says it had 197 bottles in this lot, or sorry, in this barrel. So, and release. So I imagine that, you know, they are actually going to be doing that. There's a certain amount of barrels that they have aging that whole time. 50 barrels, you know, you can get 9 releases out of that pretty easily. Kind of just pick the ones which are progressing well and kind of let the ones that have a lot left to give in them to go a little longer. But you're right in that, yeah, you know, 50 barrels isn't going to get you far in a traditional kind of warehouse environment when you've got a fair amount of whiskey to put out. If you haven't seen photos of American whiskey warehouses, they're actually called rick houses because each one of the barrels gets kind of layered in ricks. Those are the best kind of warehouses for aging whiskey because the barrel is sitting on its side. The whiskey has lots of contact with the wood, and there's a lot of air around the barrel as well. So the environment in which it's aging really plays a big factor on the way that whiskey matures. Whereas a lot of new distilleries and distilleries that are putting out, you know, cheap quality stuff, let's be fair, they're palletizing their whiskey, which means they're basically just putting as many barrels as they can upright on a pallet and then stacking those on top of each other. Yeah.
Hey,
That's a nice rick house. Where's that, Andrew?
is that Bardstown?
That's the bond tour, the bottled in bond tour that they've just started doing at Heaven Hill. The first time that they've started taking people actually into the rick houses instead of just sitting there for a marketing exercise. So pretty good.
That's awesome.
When did you go there?
I've heard that you need to wear a little alcohol sensor when you're going into the rick houses, because there's something like 7 floors. Each one of them has 2 to 3 barrels on that floor, and then people who are working in those rick houses, there's actually so much booze in the air that's literally kind of evaporating and kind of settling back into barrels and kind of coming out of barrels. That if you spend too much time in that environment, yeah, that looks amazing.
Yeah, it was about seven stories.
So yeah, if you're spending too much time in those higher levels, kind of in between barrels, the little sensor will go off and say, you know, you need to go and take a break and take a breather before you get drunk, before you pass out, pretty much. So yeah, I imagine that they're trying to use the warehouses that they have here at Pinhook in the kind of the smartest way possible to get kind of longer term releases, you know, stuff that is going to be released nice and fresh and young. It can be aged in the kind of higher parts of the warehouse where it's pretty hot. It's very dry. The heat kind of extracts a lot of flavor out of the barrels, and you can kind of get a whiskey that tastes quite woody, nice and quick. And then barrels that you want to age for longer, you're going to put those right at the bottom of the warehouse and kind of let them mellow slowly in a cooler environment. Last thoughts on this Pinhook before we move on, everybody? Good enough.
I'd buy it. That's what matters, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what matters.
Just
All
need
right.
to get all the special stuff into Australia. Like all the random brands. People don't realize how many brands outside of Jim Beam, Turkey, Buffalo Trace there in the US. Like they've dedicated, I'm not even say aisles. I'm going to say like, so if you go to like Myers or Grace Brothers, haven't said that in a long time. David Jones, I'll just dedicate a whole floor just to American whiskey. That's how much we don't see over here.
Yeah, and it's cheap too, huh? That's
Yeah, it's cheap too as well.
That's the worst part. Well,
it is getting dearer. It's getting dearer and it's getting harder to get the good stuff, but yeah, a lot cheaper.
That's a nice little transition. Thank you, Videl. That tonight, for everyone who sticks around, we're going to pop a little discount for you in the chat on our collection of American whiskies, some of which we'll be tasting tonight. All right, let's go next into the Nashville Barrel Company. This is called the Uproxx pick, and it's not hard to guess. This was picked by some people who worked at. Oh, you've actually got the bottle there as well.
No, I've got a different bottle.
Oh, you're pouring the Bad Head Redhead.
So Whiskey Hunt Australia also did a Nashville barrel pick as well. So I thought, you know what, let's do a head-to-head and see how both of them compare, because I've tasted, as you can tell, I've tasted this enough, so I can give my thoughts on both.
Was that from your trip to Kentucky, Videl?
Oh, I didn't get to actually go to Nashville. It got cut short, so I was supposed to go, but yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't part of this pick.
All right. Well, so you might think Nashville Barrel Company. We're going to be tasting a Tennessee whiskey, but this is actually not a Tennessee whiskey. This is a bourbon. So this is another. You can almost call this the MGP tasting. This is another Indiana product. This is a low. This is a high rye high rye bourbon mash bill. So this is an MGP recipe of 75% corn, 21% rye, and 4% barley, which was aged for 5 years in Indiana before finishing in Nashville for 14 months. So it brings it up to about 6 years old.
Is it still the same barrel? Like they didn't finish it in like anything else?
I shouldn't have used the word finished. Yes, it was the same barrel, which was then it was. So it's not a double oak or a toasted or anything like that.
Oh, okay, cool.
So this is a classic bourbon. It's not, obviously you couldn't label this as a Tennessee whiskey. It was kind of aged for a time in Tennessee and released in Tennessee, but since it wasn't distilled in Tennessee and since it didn't go through the Lincoln County process, which is basically like what Jack Daniels and all the other guys down there love to talk about, where they filter their whiskey through charcoal before they put it into a barrel. This didn't go through that process, so it's still a bourbon. And obviously
that's pretty amazing. Just had a bit of taste.
So that obviously raises the question. There's a very common misconception that you can't release bourbon outside of Kentucky, but bourbon is a national distilling. It's a product of America. So you can have of the USA. So you can have a Hawaii bourbon. You could have bourbon from Alaska. I don't know if you'd like bourbon from Alaska. If anyone's tried and you put your hand up, but the regulations.
What's JD?
JD is still Tennessee whiskey, but you could call it a bourbon. It does mean
it's a bourbon. I will die on that hill. I will die on that hill.
I know. I totally agree with you. It is a bourbon, but they want to be different.
This is the kind of thing that like starts Facebook arguments that just 100%.
But then Dick will stoke the fires by releasing an 8-year-old bourbon and labeling it a bourbon, just to be different, you know.
I actually believe that
if you
Dickel
told
has...
Jack Daniel they were a bourbon, they'll kill you.
Yeah, that's true.
I actually believe Dickel has some whiskey that they've sourced themselves. It's not all produced by Dickel.
They've got MGP rye, but all the whiskey / bourbon's theirs.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Actually, there's a few other ones we can kind of call out as being MGP ryes. There's the big one that everyone knows is Bullet Rye is MGP. Rebel Yell, Smooth Ambler. Whistle Pig uses a small amount of MGP, and Angel's Envy use MGP as well.
Well, they're starting to move away from it.
Yes, eventually they will.
Mm.
I haven't seen them distill rye yet, though. Are they distilling rye and bourbon at age of 70?
No, yeah, it's still in both, but rye is the hardest.
Mm.
Rye's always been the hardest. That's why no one wants to work with it.
I only saw them distilling bourbon, but they were bottling rye.
Yeah, that'll probably be MGP.
So I really
That's what
like
I
the nose
thought.
on this one. I reckon the nose on this is awesome. Kind of fruity.
I get a lot of
Yeah.
tannin and a lot of oak in that. I find it hard to believe it was all 53 gallon. I think there's been some small format or something there, or I don't know. I get a lot of it anyway.
No, I get that. I do see there's a fair bit of tannin on the palate there. Sitting pretty high. This is 59%. So yeah, obviously cask strength. I'd be surprised if you didn't feel it.
Wait. So this Nashville, it's a rye or a bourbon?
Bourbon.
Okay, cool. Because on the label it says rye for some reason.
Was it? Uproxx pick.
Probably I'm an idiot. That's why.
No,
What
straight
does it
bourbon.
say? Straight. Ah, there you go. Straight bourbon. There we go.
This is what happens when I do labels at 1 a.m.
But this is a classic bourbon because I just put it ahead against that redhead by Whiskey Home Australia. So that redhead is a high alcohol content fireball. That's what it is. It is fireball at 60%. So you get a lot of cinnamon. It's almost if you're eating Cinnabon, that's what that redhead is. This is more, to me, this Uproxx is like a caramel slice, which I find a bit more enjoyable. I shouldn't really say anything bad about it, but but
No, I
this Uproxx
I did get a lot of cinnamon on the that redhead.
Yeah. It's 60% fireball. That's what it is.
Hey, look, I enjoy that a hell of a lot better than regular fireball.
But yeah, this Uproxx is like kicking my ass.
Feel free to add a little bit of water
Impressive.
as well, guys. It's not sacrilege in American whiskey to add water.
For those who care, Uproxx is pretty much a lifestyle magazine, online lifestyle magazine in the States. A little bit of like Broadsheet meets Time Out, meets Man of Many, big on their sneaker culture and cars and streetwear and all that sort of stuff. So I believe it's their very first barrel pick. So yeah, it's pretty cool to get some of their stock.
Yeah, we see a lot of barrel picks coming out of America. It's been a huge trend for the past, I don't know, 5 years, something like that. It's just absolutely exploded. We haven't got anywhere near that level of barrel picking here in Australia yet. It'd be cool to start seeing a little bit more. Obviously,
I think sorry, Scott, I was going to say, I think they use it to get around some of their distribution rules and regulations and how tight they all are, and selling to bottle shops by using the fact that they're selling the whole bottle and everything bypasses some of those. So that's what I saw over there, and they'll give you the whole barrel and everything with it. So
yeah, in the States, they have a 3-tier system, which absolutely sucks. Basically, imagine you've got a producer, you've got a wholesaler or a kind of distributor, and a bottle shop. And then on top of that, you have to be a consumer. So you can't, as a consumer, you can't really buy directly from the distillery in America. You can't buy directly obviously it's not really different in Australia where you can't buy directly from a distributor. But it means that it's very hard for consumers sometimes to get access to really cool bottles because it has to be distributed to their state. And with 50 states and 50 different regulations around how whiskey moves around the country, it's really, really difficult for certain states to get their hands on any kind of interesting whiskeys.
It's
Um,
it's
yeah.
not even just allocated stuff as well. Depending on
Yeah.
which state you live in, if you're maybe you like whiskey, but you also like cognac, you like rum. For some states, your rum selection is basically our equivalent of Bundy. That is your entire rum option. There isn't. We're actually comparably quite lucky. Even American produced brands such as Privateer are in like 10 states. Stuff produced in the country just doesn't get distributed because you have to go through so many hoops, through so many minefields. It's wild as well. The concept of where we can buy from auction houses and we can buy from different retail shops across the country. I mean, the whiskey list, for example, couldn't exist in the States because the level of border state by state mess you have to go through. That's the thing, right? And it's just mental that we're very lucky compared to the US, where we can just hop online, buy whatever bottle we want, and it gets shipped to our house. You tell an American that, and it blows their mind that there's an app where you can order whiskey and it's not illegal. What's going on?
Unless you're Justin's House of Bourbon.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, let's not go there.
And then you tell them about virtual tastings during lockdown, and they have more than a meltdown. They just go crazy.
Yeah, we are really, really lucky over here, except for the fact that we just don't often see a lot of those products make their way across the Pacific. So we're going to try and bring as many kind of cool American whiskeys to you guys, through whatever manner we can, pretty much. Alrighty, let's move on to the next one. The next one is still Austin, which is a cask strength
about this
bourbon, distilled in Texas.
And it's not
Yeah.
Balcones.
Ooh, actually made in the place it's made from.
Yes.
So straight away for me, the nose on this one is super intriguing. Super herbal. Almost like a cumin kind of spice, something like that.
Almost like a rye, to be quite honest.
Very rummy.
Rummy.
All that
So
all that sugar. Really rummy.
We've seen a number of Texas distilleries come up in the past couple of years. The most famous being Balcones, or Garrison Brothers are doing pretty well as well. And if you guys watch the YouTube channel Whiskey Tribe, they're in the middle of, they're kind of like documenting the process of making their own whiskey as well. I think that's called Crowded Barrel. So Texas is kind of an up and coming whiskey producing region, except for the fact that it's a pretty harsh climate to age whiskey. You think Australia is a harsh climate to age whiskey. You know, you've seen photos of or kind of stories on the news about freeze outs that they have in Texas, where no one has power for weeks because it's just so bloody cold. And then at the same time, obviously, it gets super, super hot in summer as well. So it's a pretty intense environment for aging whiskey. And you can see straight away on the color of this one, it's already super dark, and the age.
I was going to ask, it's very grainy. I find it very grainy.
So it says on the back here, I'm not sure if you can ever see that. Hang on, there we go. Aged at least 2 years.
Oh, for 2 years, that's why.
So that's the kind of color you get in Texas from just 2 years. That's pretty intense.
It reminds me of Taiwanese whiskey, Cavalon. Where it only takes like 3 or 4 years, but you just get like that intense flavor because because of the climate and the humidity, it absolutely soaks up the flavor from the barrels. I am very impressed by this, even though it's 2 years old. I had 2-year-old whiskey. This is probably my favorite so far.
Are they using 200-liter normal barrels? Or are they using smalls?
They have to be using large format barrels because
that is the same color as any other aged spirit here in a 200-liter cask. 2 years. Texas magic.
Yeah, I honestly think it is the environment. Because if you were using a smaller cask, it just would be shockingly tannic, shockingly
Probably black at this
woody.
point.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, this is super interesting on the nose to me. I think the palate's really nice too. What's the percentage? We're looking at 59% on this one. How are we all going with the cask strength stuff? Is it not it's not too much too early?
Can we go stronger?
Yeah, let's go bigger. So something I found interesting about these guys, their mash bill and their whole thing is that they are sourcing and they're making their own whiskey themselves, which obviously is no easy feat. Their mash bill is made up of entirely grains made in Texas, or grown in Texas. So they have 70% non-GMO corn, so just corn that hasn't been super kind of engineered to withstand everything. Then they have 25%. It's called Bourbon Rye, and 5% wildfire malted barley. And I basically searched a little bit about each one of those, and I couldn't find much about the barley. It's usually used for making like IPAs and beers, but they're using it for making obviously whiskey. And then the rye is actually really interesting. The Bourbon Rye that they use, it's usually used as a cover crop, which when you're farming you're trying to aim for a particular kind of product. A lot of the time you can't just plant the same thing year in, year out, or season in, season out, because you start to kind of pull all the same kind of nutrients that plant requires out of the ground, and different plants require different nutrients from the ground. So you can't just keep planting the same thing over and over again, or you basically like kill the ground. You kill the soil and the nutrients and things that are built up. And so what they'll do is they'll switch things out. They'll go from corn to rye, or from wheat to actually rye generally is a really good cover crop. It kind of replenishes lots of nitrogen in the soil. And this is going right back to the foundation of the colonies of states, was basically they learned how to start harvesting tobacco, and tobacco was one of the first industries in America, selling tobacco and producing tobacco. But tobacco is super harsh on the land. It's super harsh on the environment. And so you had to plant rye to regenerate the soil. And that's part of the reason why early whiskey in America was all rye whiskey, was because there was so much. Yeah, that's exactly right, Paul. Yeah, crop rotation adds nitrogen to the soil. That's why there was so much rye whiskey in the early parts of American distillation, was because there was just a need to put more rye in the ground.
So are we seeing still Austin in the country, or what?
I haven't seen it here before. Honestly, this is my first time tasting it.
For 2 years old, it's pretty impressive. If you ever
Actually,
tasted
that's an
Castle
interesting
and
question.
Key,
Sorry, Videl.
Castle and Keys, yeah. If you tasted Castle and Keys 2-year-old, it is not very good. I can understand why they put it out, because they needed cash flow. Let's be honest, they put it out because they needed cash flow. When I was in Kentucky, it only cost me $5 US, so I wasn't going to complain.
I'll take that any day. Make good old fashioned.
Oh,
Cool. All righty.
I was just saying, Chris's comment. Any good bottle shop recommendations in LA? Well, let me tell you, I've got all these places where I can send you.
Would you say Total Wine Co?
There's places I've been to where, just anybody, just shoot me a message. Anytime you go overseas, I'll send you the places. I found a Michter's 20 in LA for 10 grand, and a Willet 19-year-old for 7. No, I just left him there. No, you guys can keep him.
Whenever
yeah,
you say
message me.
Mictors, I don't know whether you mean that's good value or not.
Oh no! It's look, Mictors is everybody should know that I love Mictors with an absolute passion. Best whiskey ever. They are not worth their price tags, not one bit.
Alrighty, moving on.
Yeah, let's move on. I don't want to talk about Mictors. I'll be sitting here for hours.
Alrighty, so guys, let's go into whiskey number 5. This is the short barrel, barrel proof Kentucky bourbon. I'll show you this one here. If you're wondering why some of these have price tags on it, it's because we just recently had the Sydney Whiskey Show, and all of these were on the Rare Whiskey Bar. So we've got the short barrel single barrel, and this one is actually another barrel pick by these guys, Sealbucks, and that's basically like a craft spirits online bottle shop in America, and the name for those guys comes from a classic cocktail which the guy who created it absolutely lied about its history. It was apparently some cocktail recipe that he dug up in the basement of the hotel, which was a couple of 100 years old, and then it just all turned out to be completely wrong. So he thought that'd be a good name for my bottle shop. So the short barrel is a Kentucky bourbon, and it's from a distillery which it's distilled not by these guys, but it's not distilled by a massive distillery. These guys actually called Green River Distilling, and Green River is a pretty new distillery to get reopened. It's basically a distillery that was opened pre-prohibition. It was actually one of the first distilleries to open in Kentucky. If you guys have ever seen, something on the label of American whiskeys, sometimes you'll see DSP and then a number, and that is like it's like the registration number for the distillery, and they're keeping the same registration numbers from the first times these things were registered, and that distillery is actually DSP number 10. So it was the 10th distillery to be registered by the state of Kentucky. So 1792 is when Kentucky was established as a state, and so the 10th distillery to be established after that. So this one is pretty high proof. This is 60.25%, and its age statement is 5 years and 4 months.
Man, is this competitive Elijah Craig barrel proof? This is amazing.
Yeah, I've been so excited. I'm so glad it's Green River.
Oh god,
because it had such a mixed reputation when they released their new stuff, and then kind of came back on the market again and went, oh yeah, actually we're making really good stuff. Sorry about those first few years. So this is a
Sorry,
green.
guys.
Is it short barrel is owned by Green River, or it's just Short Barrel's an IB bottler?
Yep.
And it's green. That's cool. The Green River's doing sourced product then for people.
Yeah, so I believe that's kind of partially through Sealbucks, and Sealbucks is all about supporting and putting craft brands to the front. And then Short Barrel, yeah, it's a barrel company. I'm sure it's not something that they're selling huge amounts of sourced product, but yeah, most distilleries, if they're given the opportunity to sell a whole barrel worth of stock, and they can get some cash flow in the door, they're not usually going to say no unless they really don't have enough for their regular releases. So the mash bill on this one is apparently 70% corn, 21% rye, 9% malted barley. So maybe the 9%, the higher barley content, I think is actually contributing to the nose in this one a fair bit.
It's just cherry. There's this wonderful cherry, grapey, like cherry herring, cherry brandy, but it's actually at that age where it's not grainy, and it's nice sweetness. I'm really impressed for my first try of Green River. I'm really impressed.
Wait, is this Green River?
It doesn't taste
Yeah.
anything like normal Green River.
'Cause,
Sorry,
yeah,
Al.
Oh
Green,
no.
Green River was
Sorry,
amazing, but
nothing like normal Green River.
because
So the,
Green River
the
got
name-
bought out by who was it, Bardstown Bourbon Company, and I tried a couple of their bottles that they actually produce, and it was absolutely amazing. I was hoping that somebody here in Australia would actually take them up on the offer to start distributing. But when Bardstown Bourbon Company bought them, that just ended everything because they don't distribute to anybody because they can't even serve the American market at the moment.
Yeah, the demand in the US is huge. The demand
Yeah.
over there is absolutely massive. So they're the kind of brands that are small and exciting and new that actually have the ability to do full distribution to Australia. They're they're further along in their life cycle than a lot of things we're tasting today.
Oh, if I can get a bottle of the short barrel.
It's good stuff. So it's
Oof.
the name of the short barrel name. Short barrel, apparently, that's what they call a barrel that you come back to check on it, so to see if is this whiskey good enough? Should we start to release it? And it's way too low. It's super low, and you go, oh crap, pull it out so we can decant it before it turns into nothing. That's what the name is from, and this one here is reasonably kind of low in the barrel, only 192 bottles out of a barrel. Sometimes you can get up to 250 depending on the ABV and that it's brought down to. So that's the kind of the name of short barrel. It's supposed to be a barrel that's kind of already kind of taken on a lot and needs to be bottled now pretty much. And I believe this one here from Green River was high in the rickhouse. So it's 5 years high in the rickhouse. That makes sense why we get that kind of color. That makes sense. That kind of color high in the rickhouse in Kentucky. That's
Makes total sense.
That's kind of pretty much exactly what you'd expect, which is awesome. It's so good to see. Good quality, small distillery Kentucky whiskey at that age. It's really cool.
Or it's been thieved a lot.
Yeah. They call those the honey barrels, and I believe I can't remember which. I think it might be the Buffalo Trace guys. I think it might be Freddie who told everyone that the best barrels are the ones that are shiny, because everybody's been leaning over them to kind of reach in and grab the good stuff from inside. They've been polished up. Anyone else really like that one? Yeah. Paul,
I need a bottle. How many bottles are there from short barrel? Since we got
Very
the discount
unique.
code.
I'll have to check.
I'm gonna finally chirp in. This is my favorite.
Wow.
There you go.
Good to hear it. All righty. I'm just going to have a quick sip of water before we jump into the last one. All righty. So last whiskey of the day is the Doc Swinsons. And this is almost kind of a little bit rare for Doc Swinsons to just be releasing a straight bourbon whiskey. If you look on the website, it's almost never ending, the kinds of finishes that they're doing. They're doing some pretty crazy barrel finishing projects. All basically anything you can think of that doesn't sound terrible, they're doing it. There's a distillery or a barrel company that are called Good Times, and they do all the ones that do sound terrible.
Wait, no, Good Times is amazing. If anyone
Have
can
you
get a
tried
bottle
any of
Good
their stuff?
Times- Yeah, at when I was in Kentucky. Did I want a bottle? Yes. Can I buy one? No. Nobody was selling that stuff because it's become one of those unicorn bottles.
Yeah, they finished lots of things in liqueurs and weird kind of flavors. I've seen them also kind of try and copy Seagrass and Dovetail a little bit as well. Kind of finishing apricot brandy and Martinique rum, those kind of things. Anyway, Doc Swinson does lots of finishes, but then everyone's like, oh, okay, but what does your actual whiskey taste like? what does your bourbon taste like? So this is the whiskey before it goes through that process of being finished. And this is a pick for Total Wine. So Total Wine is one of the massive retailers in the States. Total Wine, you've been to a few of them, Videl.
Of course I have.
They
Total
do
Wine's
lots of
the bomb.
barrel picks, right? They do lots of different things.
They got a whole aisle dedicated to all their barrel picks.
Yeah.
And then they even got barrel picks behind glass. That's the status of bourbon in the US, where I've got a barrel pick and I still have to put it behind glass. I don't understand it, but hey, it is what it is.
Do they have a reputation for good barrel picks, or do they have any reputation at all?
Yes, they do. They do. Some of these Total Wine picks, especially stuff from Buffalo Trace, they do have secondary where they just absolutely command stupid amount of money. I've seen some of their Weller picks. They'll say, "Oh yeah, this is a 107," but it could be like 12 to 15 years old. So you're entering like Pappy Van Winkle territory at the moment.
Awesome.
So yeah, if you got a Total Wine, just pick up a bottle. You never know what you're going to get, to be quite honest.
I'm getting lots of like nuttiness on the nose.
Are we sure it's not from Beam or something?
No, this is another MGP in the MGP tasting.
What did we call it? The American tasting? We should just call it MGP tasting. Really.
We could have. So yeah, distilled in Indiana. This is the same recipe as the Uproxx. So if you want to go back and kind of smell the Uproxx, the Nashville Barrel Company, this is the same mash bill. So this is the 75% corn, 21% rye, 4% malted barley mash bill.
Totally different whiskies. This one's a lot more refined.
Yeah, chalk and cheese. I was stunned.
Pretty incredible.
So I always like to say this, that distillers like to talk up that, oh, Rickhouse and where I did this thing and I did with the bottling makes a huge difference, because it's the same ingredients, it's the same stills, the same water, all this stuff. But yeah, I guess maybe it's the different IB spin as well. Maybe Nashville are looking for a profile that Doc Swinson's looking for something else. But they are so chalk and cheese spirits. They're entirely different whiskies.
They're also about the same age as well. So they're both about 6 years old.
It's all about climate and whereabouts the barrels are in the rickhouse. Where we go? We went to Lux Row. They'll have one section for their Rebel Yell, and then they'll have another one for their Orphan barrels. Same recipe. It's just where they actually put them in the rickhouse. That's the only difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost always think that the cheapest stuff goes at the top of the warehouse. Stuff that's really you want it to age nice and quick. You want it to be kind of taking all those characteristics that people like, your vanillas, your cinnamons, those kind of things. Your mid-tier stuff, obviously in the middle, and your highest value stuff is going to be probably towards the bottom. Obviously, there's so much different characteristics from every different barrel. Every barrel is different, which is why we love barrel picks, which is why we love single barrels. But unless you're doing something like a Buffalo Trace, where you want to have a little bit of characteristic from all different parts of the warehouse, in that scenario, they're going to do a cross section. They're going to do a little bit from the top, a little bit from the bottom, a little bit from the middle. Unless you're doing something like that, then you've got to be really tactical about the way that you age your spirits and where you put it, because climate is super changes huge amounts.
Or you've got to be as silly as Maker's Mark still and rotate your barrels. I'm pretty sure they're the only ones who do.
They don't want to go past 8 years, right? So their thing is like
they just released a 12-year-old.
Well, main product, right, is a consistent age. So I suppose the idea is like we want every single barrel to taste like this, whereas Jack and all the other bottlers are like, this Rick House does this product. I also think all the high ABV stuff is really important for your like 37, 40% ABV stuff, because you want, when you water it down that far, you still want flavor. And you can imagine if you bring it down from 50 to 40, there's kind of not as much interaction happening, but bring it from 70 down to 40, despite there being more water, it's like, it's a lot more concentrated. It's that like that Ribena equivalent of bourbon, right?
Yeah, super concentrated cherry flavors. Yeah, if anyone doesn't kind of know the kind of, I don't know if it's technically thermodynamics, but like, you know, the environment of rick houses, because they are so high and the bottom levels are humid, the top levels are dry. It's almost like completely different aging environments, where the bottom, the whiskey in the barrel is going to, you know, basically increase in water content, and it's going to, I'm completely forgetting it. But the top level of the warehouse is where it's super like high. Oh, I've totally lost it. I've totally lost it.
That's all the heat is. That's all the heat is. High evaporation loss.
It's drier. Yeah. So you're losing more water out of the barrels at the top, which then basically falls down to the bottom of the warehouse, where it then seeps into the barrels at the bottom. So at the bottom, you're increasing in water content, and at the top, you're increasing in alcohol content.
And you've got a lot more wood movement.
Yeah, it's a spectrum all the way down.
In, out.
What do we think of these docks?
Yeah, it's great. Quite refined, very easy drinker.
It's surprising you say that at 61.6%.
Look, we've all had worse with bourbon. Bourbon's worse with high proof stuff.
Is there anyone on the call who doesn't actually usually drink American whiskey? This is kind of like a little bit of an introduction or a deep dive into American whiskey for you.
No, these are proper drinkers.
Yeah, that's what I like to see.
Don't shake your head, Owen. Like I said, American whiskey is better. Let's be honest.
Proper drinkers with you in the room, Del.
I've been drinking it a few weeks now. I'm getting used to it.
Yeah, if you ever join Brass, you'll see Videl's huge pours of whiskey. You know, have you overflowed?
I do 100 ml pours. I do 100 ml pours.
We don't encourage that on this kind of format, Videl. That's not appropriate.
Look, I plan to finish this tonight, so hey, that's maybe one pour right there. I'll try to finish it tonight.
All righty. Well, before we all kind of delve into debauchery like Videl, we're going to put up a little poll on the screen for you guys to all share which was your favorite whiskey of the night. So obviously, you're actually welcome to pick 2 whiskeys. You can pick 1 and 2.
No, short barrel. I'll stick with short barrel. To me, that's a that's the problem with Australia. Whoever's distributing Heaven Hill in Australia are just absolutely useless. We get normal Elijah Craig, but we can't get Elijah Craig barrel proof.
It's grey imported.
Imagine we get something like that, maybe at 150, 200 mark. Yeah, 100%.
There's no Heaven Hill officially doesn't have an exporter, so Heaven Hill officially doesn't take their bourbon out to the US. So anything that comes to the States is coming through, I think through Coles. I think Grey imports it through Pinnacle or something. But
no, it has to be through Pinnacle because they're still getting they're getting normal Elijah Craig. They're not getting the ECBP.
And then we get
which
black
is a damn
label
shame.
Evan Williams. We don't get white label.
Yeah.
So
no, we still get white label. We still get white label.
All right, still 2 people to join the poll. If you want to jump on, there's still 1 more person. We want to know. It was neck and neck. There was one that's winning out. Videl, stop putting your finger on the scale, please.
Well, I'm from Maryland, so I'm glad you gave me another option with the short barrel. So I went with Sagamore as well.
Nice. All right. Well, if everybody's had a chance to answer, then that puts us with the.
Oh, I want to say, yeah, short barrel. Boom.
Yep. The short barrel was the winner of the night. Just a classic Kentucky flavor profile. That's awesome.
Okay,
Sag-
can I
Your
start
man-
bad mouthing?
Oh, hang on.
Wait, can I bad mouth something?
The last person
Thank
just
God
voted.
nobody picked Pinhook. Good. Nobody picked Pinhook. I can
Well, the
finally
last
say it.
person just voted, which brought us back to a 50-50. So now we're sitting at Sagamore and short barrel. I think that's totally fair.
Sagamore, congratulations, guys. It is a awesome rye. Short barrel. Are we seeing short barrel here? Give us some insight.
Not unless you see it through the whiskey list. Let's say that. All
And
right,
I'm
guys.
kind of sad that nobody voted for Still Austin because I thought that was absolutely banging. Wait. I didn't even vote the second time. Did I vote the second time? No, I didn't.
Before you guys run away, we are going to do a special for you tonight. We're going to do 10% off all of our American whiskey selection with the code BRASS10. I'm just going to chuck that into the chat now, along with the link to our American whiskey imports. And for everyone who's joined on the call tonight, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming.
Scott, you shared it to me only.
Oh, are you telling me you don't want it, Oliver?
Ollie needs that link, you know.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, all I can say is, guys, there is a Calumet 15 that it's been sitting on the shelf there that people have been absolutely ignoring, and it is absolutely phenomenal. And people just like, oh, I want Pappy Van Winkle 15. No, I think this is probably on par with it. So I don't know.
The Calamet's awesome.
Oh, Calumet's amazing. They also have a 16 and 14-year-old.
It keeps selling out, but we keep bringing more in each shipment.
Of course I do.
Well, until everybody kind of like jumps on the hype train and then realizes how good it is, grab it while you can.
True.
Righty, guys. Well, thank you very much for joining us. We'll finish the official part of the evening there, but feel free to hang on. We're going to chill here, finish our whiskeys, just have a good chat. Really appreciate you all joining us, and have a great evening. Thank you, guys.